Greens YouTube, Captain Machine back for another video, and today we're talking about the contract directory. I do apologise, I don't physically have my copy with me at the moment. I don't know where it is. It's somewhere within this filing system I call my room. But here's a picture of it. I'll just leave that there for a moment. And a bit of background story for you. My introduction to SLA Industries came from a friend, a Scottish friend ironically, who basically started running it and explained the background to me and such and so forth. And he never had this book in his collection. This came out after he stopped buying all the stuff. And because it's not often mentioned in the forums, I didn't realise it existed at the very start. It wasn't until I started looking much deeper into the actual universe that I discovered this book existed. And it turns out I'd passed up several times at different shops in the past because look at it, it's bright, it's colourful, it's not brooding, it's not dark, it's not horrifying, it's not what you expect from a front cover of a SLA Industries book. However, don't let the cover deceive you, it's pretty good. It's a bit of a mixed bag, but it does what I wanted the setting to do for a long time, and I think it's failed to do for a considerable amount of time as well, which is it focuses its opinion on one point in the universe and just drills down into it as far as it can go. This book itself talks about the contract killer circuit, which has been mentioned several times in several books up until this point, which are basically your analogy of reality entertainment back when reality entertainment was its infancy. Think of Running Man meets pro wrestling, and you get a rough idea of what that scene is like. These people are trained killers, and people do die, and they do play death matches and things like that, and they do go out there with swords, guns, blades, sniper rifles, bombs, tanks, you name it, or battle suits, you name it, they have it. If that's their particular shtick, then that's what they run with. At the higher levels of it, you tend not to get fatalities very often, because the honest truth is that it makes more money to keep having these recurring grudge matches and storylines progressing out, much like how wrestling used to be back in the day before it got crap. Oh dear. Just to very briefly bring that up, I mean, I watched wrestling when I was a kid back in the 80s and the early 90s. I loved it, absolutely loved it. And I remember my dad said to me once, he says, it's not real, you know. I mean, if they really wanted to hurt each other, they'd both be dead by now. And that always stuck with me, and it becomes more relevant when you start reading stuff like this. But back then, you had characters. You didn't have just John Cena or whatever the rest of the names are. You had the Big Boss Man, Macho Man Randy Savage, Ultimate Warrior, Hulk Hogan, $1 Million Man, Big Boss Man, Demolition, Earthquake. You had characters, not people, and they played off those personas, and that's kind of what people in the contract circuit do. They find a shtick and they run with it. You tend not to get very many generic people. I mean, even the most generic one, Dealer Destroyer, has a shtick to her, or Johnny Automatic has a shtick to him. It might be a bit more obscure than say, I am a guy who always uses sniper rifles, but it's a shtick nonetheless. And this book goes into great deal of detail explaining how the circuit works, both from within and without. It explains a lot of the key characters in it, gives you some really good bios on them, but doesn't stack them up, which I suppose is really good in terms of it allows you to, if you ever face them, it allows you to customise their difficulty in approaching them. But it would have been nice to get a couple, so you would have known what the relative power levels of some of these fellas are, and you could work around that, but you don't get that, unfortunately. But for someone like me who doesn't actually use a Savage, the SLA Industries rules, use a Savage world instead, it's actually quite beneficial because I can build a character around the description alone. So I'm not too perturbed. It also gives you information about the heels of the universe as well, because you always get heels in wrestling and stuff like that, the bad guys basically. And this, contract law means if you are part of the contract killer circuit, you are impervious to the most common forms of law. So you get serial killers who become famous and successful enough that they decide to join the contract killer circuit because they know if they carry on doing what they're doing, they're going to get found out and just horribly butchered in a dark alley somewhere. And you also get Dark Knight operatives who are Coven blown will sometimes go in for the circuit, as well as other representatives of other organisations. Like Thresher's got a power armoured fella who fights in the tournaments for him, and he's basically there to be the PR bloke for Thresher. He's a pretty terrible example of it, but that's kind of why he's there. So you get all that information, and it's really handy. The only disadvantage is it's really hard to use it. Contract killers are don't tend to work together in teams. You don't get like tag teams or four-man teams of them very often. You tend to get them come together for special events, and that's about it. So it's very hard to use this book in terms of a regular adventuring group, because when you join the Contract Killer Circuit, you have to fail a medical psychology exam. You have to be deemed clinically insane to join, because no sane person would join such a stressful and deadly occupation. And bear in mind that I'm comparing that to what the average operative does for a living as well. So your SCL rating immediately drops down to 11, which is civilian, which means you can't take BPNs anymore, because BPNs are never authorised to level 11s, they're only 10s and up. Even the most basic bog standard street maintenance BPN that operatives hate to do but it pays for the rent can't be given to a member of the Contract Killer Circuit. It does mention that occasionally contract killers come across squads doing BPN and decide to help them just because they want to, but they never get paid for it. It's not something they do. So it's really hard to figure out how to use this information in a starting adventure. For starting characters, and I get the impression it's something more like akin to, say, the epic level book for D&D. It's something that you aspire to, not something you start as. But it does give you a lot of information so you can interact with that universe, because there's plenty of ways of interacting with it without becoming a member of the circuit itself. So there is some benefits to it in that case. In terms of the crunch, because I've talked about the fluff, there is some really good and really bad stuff in here. This is kind of where the mixed bag comes in. First of all, you get lots of really good new items to buy, and I've always said that there's not enough items to buy in SLA Industries. And bear in mind, this is a game about a capitalistic organisation where you are encouraged to buy the latest thing, the latest gun, the latest armour, the latest gear. But if you read the rule book, even if you're going through the karma stuff, there is not a lot of it. And it's always welcome to see new stuff. And this gives you rules for customization of your weapons and your armour, especially your melee weapons. And this is such a really good part of the book. It's a very short part, it's only a couple of pages, but it's such a good part of the book that actually appears, in rules context anyway, in the actual Savage Worlds SLA Industries. So if you wanted to know, if you've picked up Savage Worlds SLA Industries, you downloaded it, and you've got the first couple of books, and you wonder where all these rules for like oscillating blades comes from and things like that, that's where they come. That's where they come from, the contract directory. You've also got rules in there for sponsorships, which are really handy, because obviously sponsorship's what drives operatives. It's also really handy for regular games as well, because you are, even in a regular operative, encouraged to get sponsorship deals to pay for your equipment, pay for your maintenance, get new items, new gear, new armour, stuff like that, because the honest truth is that BPNs alone do not pay for that stuff at all. You'd need to find other methods of income. And then you've got the martial arts system, which I think is a bit redundant, because the combat system in SLA Industries is very complicated to start with, and I also believe adding extra layers to it is a bad idea. I can see where they were going with it, but even when White Wolf did this with their White Wolf combat book, and occasionally with the stuff that came in the compendiums, even then I didn't want to use the martial arts rules in there, because I didn't think they were needed at all. And I even strained to use the ones that are in Mech Warrior, for example, but that's more built into the system, and the rules are not so overpowering. It's just their attacks with martial arts to have different outcomes. They're not massively different. It's just maybe you'll do an extra bit of fatigue to somebody you hit, or you do a little bit more damage, but not massively so. And then the worst part, in my opinion, is the stress system. And the stress system is a massive collection of tables of things that either increase or decrease your stress, and it becomes a bookkeeping exercise of the highest order. And you thought that keeping track of your bullets was bloody boring. Oh my god, I would never be able to run this at all. I mean, handing out multiple like photocopied pamphlets to just so people had rules to hand would be a nightmare, absolute nightmare. And then once you start getting into it, it becomes a method of not really role playing your character but balance the numbers. So if you get too stressed, you become combat ineffective primarily. So you have to find ways of not getting stressed, like taking drugs or having sex or getting drunk or relaxing and meditating or something like that, and you start to drift down towards the hedonistic route, because that's where it gives you the biggest bonuses to your stress modifier. Maybe it encourages that aspect of it, but I feel that you can do it with roleplay. You don't need a mechanic system that drives your character in that direction. I'd much rather roleplay that than be told by a series of arbitrary numbers, a very complicated series of arbitrary numbers, that I feel stressed. That's just me. So all in all, it's a mixed bag, but I do like the fact that it's the direction that the setting is going into, where it's focused on one particular thing. And obviously then spreads out periphery-wise to that and gives you a little bit more information to things related to it. As a side note, you also get rules for a new race, which are the advanced carrions. Now, I mentioned carrions before. They're those strange mutant humanoid things with like skinned dog head things. Occasionally you get one that becomes smart and can talk and understand, and they're not allowed jobs in SLA Industries, but if one can prove that he's intelligent and not working against the industry itself, they can occasionally get let into the contract killer circuit, and this is the only place you can play them. I believe the rules for these fellows also exist in the Savage Slave universe in the book, but bear in mind that none of them will ever be given a SLA rating higher than 11. No matter how good they get, no matter how much loyalty they display to the company, nobody trusts them as far as they can throw them. And then finally, because you can't earn money through BPNs because you don't have the combat clearance to do it, you have to earn money other ways, because obviously sponsorship deals pay for a lot, but what happens if you're on a bit of a dry patch, or nobody wants to fight you, or you're waiting for your regular opponent to recover from the beating you just gave him? Then the other choice you have is to do what is known as your little green friend, which is a hunter sheet, which is basically a bounty, effectively. And anyone can do bounties no matter what their SCL rating are. Even civilians can do them, but obviously anyone that attempts it usually just dies. And SLA will pay anybody for a handed in bounty. They don't care where it comes from. I don't believe there's any examples in the setting of soft companies collecting bounties, but if they did it right, I couldn't see why not. They obviously have to hide the fact that they were working for a soft company as opposed to being, say, a prop, which is basically an independent person who just basically wears a mask identity and carries whatever guns he can find, whatever army he can salvage to earn a living. So if you could pretend to be one of those, it would be appropriate. Why do I mention this at the very end of the review? Because Hunter Sheets comes up later on. It's becomes its own book, to be fair. And if you go onto the forums, there's plenty of people made their own Hunter Sheets and have done really good write-ups. So there is that aspect to it as well, which basically means that your players, if they get bored of BPNs, can start hunting down bad guys instead of getting their bounty for it. Okay, guys, oh sorry, I forgot to give you the score, didn't I? Overall, I give this a solid 3 out of 5. It's a really good book. The focus of it seems a little bit off in terms of the fact that it's hard to use. It's not something I would say you can directly use, it's something you would indirectly use instead. But it does give you a lot of key concepts like new weapons, new armour, and also things like that. And the customization rules are really good, and it gives you more information about the background, which is never a bad thing. So all in all, solid 3 out of 5. Okay guys, thank you for your time. See you later.